The boy was too small for the weather. That was the first thing Rowan Holt registered when he pulled his cabin door open into the howling dark. Not the woman's face, not the snow already horizontal across the ridge, but the child in her arms, maybe 4 or 5 years old, head pressed into her shoulder, one small boot missing. The wind had been building since noon, and was now the kind of wind that takes things. The woman on his step was large with cold and effort, her coat insufficient for the temperature, her breath coming in audible pulls. She had walked the last mile at least. He could tell by the way she was carrying the child, not with ease but with the last of whatever she had. She looked up at him. Her face went the color of old ash. "Rowan," she said. He had not heard that voice in 6 years. "If this already has you holding your breath, subscribe to this channel right now and stay until the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story reaches tonight, because it is traveling somewhere real. What happens inside this cabin over the next 4 days? While the worst blizzard in 7 years buries every road out of Hardin Creek Pass and leaves 3 people with nothing between them but heat and truth, it is going to ask more of Rowan Holt than any winter ever has. And it is going to ask something of you too. Stay with me. 6 years is a long time on a mountain. Clara Marsh had left in the October of 1877, and she had not written, and she had not sent word through anyone. And Rowan had spent the first year waiting for some explanation to arrive that would make the leaving make sense, and the second year understanding that none was coming, and the third year converting the waiting into the gray, functional numbness that is the only thing a man alone on a mountain can afford if he intends to keep working through it. He had kept working. The cabin was solid. The trapping was adequate. He came down to Hardin Creek Pass twice a year for supplies, and he was civil to people, and he did not talk about Clara Marsh, and people who knew him well enough had stopped asking. He did not know why she had left. That was the part that had not resolved in 6 years, the thing that lived beneath the numbness, the way a splinter lives beneath skin, not always, painful but never entirely absent. He had gone back over the weeks before she left, until the going back stopped telling him anything new. He had said something. He had done something. He had not been enough of something. The mountain had been too much of something else. He had constructed and discarded 17 versions of the reason, and not one of them had ever closed clean. Clara, for her part, had spent those 6 years in Billings, working first as a seamstress, then a boarding house cook, then its manager when the owner's health failed. It paid enough to keep herself, and after the spring of 1879, Samuel. She had named the boy for her father, which was the first decision she had made that she was entirely certain of. The second was not telling Rowan. She had believed something when she left. A letter not addressed to her, in a hand she recognized, found in his coat pocket while mending the lining, saying things she had read as proof of something that turned out to be something else entirely. A letter meant for a different man, a Rowan Marsh staying at the same trading post that winter, his mail handed wrong by a clerk who had not looked closely enough. She had learned this in November 1883 from a woman named Ida Parr, over supper, in the particular devastation of being given the full story of a thing you built 6 years of your life around believing. Clara had sat very still while Ida talked. Then she had excused herself and gone to her room and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. She had been planning to take Samuel to Rowan in the spring, when the mountain roads were clear. She had written the speech in her head 40 times. She had a version she could deliver without her voice breaking, and she had been practicing it. Then, in the second week of January, she had developed a cough that in 3 days became something worse, and her fever had reached a point that frightened her more than the cold did, and she had looked at Samuel and performed the only arithmetic that mattered. She was his mother, and she was ill, and she might not reach spring, and Rowan Holt was the only other person in the world who would cross any distance for this boy without being asked. She had hired the last stage out of Billings before the storm road closed, ridden it to the pass, and walked the final mile in a blizzard because the driver would not go further, and she had not argued. She had not argued because she did not have the air for it. Rowan took the boy first. He did not decide to do this. His arms moved before his mind had finished registering the situation. The child extracted from Clara's grip with the care of a man handling something that must not be dropped, pressed against his own coat, the cold body of a small boy who had been outside too long, going still against his chest in the way that exhausted children go still, with a totality that is either relief or something worse. Rowan checked the boy's face. Color bad but present, breathing shallow but even. The missing boot. The left foot wrapped instead in a strip of wool that had been torn from. Something enwrapped twice and knotted at the top with a knot he could tell had been tied by shaking hands. He looked at Clara. She was still standing in the doorway. She was not going to be standing for long. Inside, he said. She came in. He shut the door against the wind and the wall of cold that had been pressing through it, and the cabin went from roar to creak as the storm shifted outside. He put the boy on the cot near the stove. The heat hit the child immediately. He could see it in the way the rigidity began to go out of the small frame, and he put more wood on the fire than it needed, because heat was what the room required, and he would not be cold tonight. Clara had made it to the chair nearest the stove and was sitting in it with her hands in her lap and her head slightly bowed, and he could hear in her breathing that she was working harder at it than breathing should require. He went to the shelf. He put water on. He did not look at her yet. There was hardtack and jerked venison, which was not sufficient, and there was a pot of bean stew he had made 2 days ago that was still good if he heated it, and there were 2 biscuits remaining from that morning, wrapped in cloth on the shelf, and he gave the boy the biscuits first, broke them into pieces small enough, and put them directly into the child's hands where he lay on the cot, because the boy's eyes were open now, taking in the cabin with the wide, careful attention of a child in an unfamiliar place assessing whether it was safe. "It's warm here," Rowan said to him. "You're all right." The boy looked at him for a long moment. Then he ate the biscuit. Rowan put the stew on. He had not spoken to Clara. She had not spoken to him. The storm hit the north wall of the cabin with a sound like something thrown, and the lamp flickered, and the boy's eyes went to the wall and then back to Rowan, and Rowan said, "It's the wind. It won't come in." The boy held his gaze for 3 more seconds, measuring, deciding, and then appeared to accept this and turned his attention to the second piece of biscuit. Ladled the stew when it was hot. He put the larger portion in front of the boy. He put a smaller bowl in Clara's hands without looking at her face. He took nothing for himself. He sat in the chair across the room. Clara ate 4 spoonfuls. The boy ate everything and looked at the pot. "More," Rowan said, and got up and gave it to him. The boy was 5 years old. He had his mother's coloring, dark hair, Clara's particular brown eyes. But the shape of his face was something else, the line of the jaw, the way the brow sat, and Rowan looked at this and did not let himself think it yet. He was not ready for what thinking it would require of him. "What's his name?" he said. "Samuel," Clara said. He nodded. He watched Samuel work through the second bowl with the single-minded focus of a child who has been cold and hungry, and is no longer cold and is working on the hungry. When Samuel finished, he set the bowl down and looked at Rowan with his mother's eyes and said, with the directness of a 5-year-old who has decided a person can be spoken to, "Do you got a dog?" "Had one," Rowan said. "He died last spring." Samuel considered this with the gravity it deserved. "What was his name?" "Buck." "That's a good name," Samuel said, with the authority of someone who knows about names. Rowan looked at the boy for a moment longer than the conversation required. Then he looked at Clara. She had set down her bowl. She was watching him watch her son, and her face had the expression of a woman who has been building to something for 6 years and has run out of time to keep building. "Rowan," she said. "I know," he said. The cabin was very quiet except for the storm. "I know," he said again quietly, and his voice had something in it that had not been there before. Not anger and not accusation, but the sound of a man who has just felt the shape of a thing he was not expecting. The way you feel a step in the dark that is not where your foot expected the floor to be. He did not ask her until Samuel was asleep. The boy went out fast, the way young children do when they have been frightened and fed and warmed. 1 moment watching the fire from the cot, the next entirely still, his breathing deep and his face smoothed of whatever it had been holding. Rowan put another blanket over him. He stood beside the cot for a moment. Then he crossed the cabin and he sat down and he looked at Clara. "Tell me," he said. She told him about the letter from a woman named Edith, written to someone whose name she had not recognized, speaking of plans to leave with Rowan in the spring, of things promised, of a life made and a future agreed to. She told him she had found it in his coat pocket while mending the lining. She told him what she had believed it meant. She told him she had been wrong, that she had learned this 2 months ago, that it had been a letter addressed to a different man entirely, a letter for a Rowan Marsh, who had been staying at the same trading post that winter, whose mail had been handed to Rowan Holt by a post clerk who had not looked closely enough. She did not cry while she said it. She was too sick for tears and too tired for them, and she had cried everything she had on the road here. He sat with it. He did not speak for a long time. Outside, the blizzard pressed and howled, and the stove ticked, and Samuel breathed in the long, complete way of sleeping children. Rowan looked at his hands. He turned them over once, looked at the backs of them, turned them back. She watched him and did not try to fill the silence. He had spent 6 years building a structure around the not knowing. He had laid each plank of it with care, the work, the numbness, the trips down to the past twice a year, the civil behavior, the 17 versions of why she had left, none of them closing clean. He had built that structure because a man alone on a mountain has two choices. When the thing he cannot understand threatens to undo him, he can let it, or he can build something over it and live on the surface and keep working. He had kept working. The structure was gone now. In the space of one conversation, in a cabin of blizzard, it was simply gone, and what was underneath it was not anger. He had expected anger, had braced for it, but grief, the specific and terrible grief of a man who understands that he has missed something that cannot be recovered. 5 years of mornings. 5 years of a face he had not known to look for, a name he had not known to say. 5 years, he said. He turned 5 in the spring. He closed his eyes. What broke in Rowan Holt in that moment was not rage, and was not grief exactly, though it contained both. It was the specific devastation of a man who understands all at once what he did not have, not what was taken from him, because she had not taken it with malice, but what was simply absent. 5 years of a weight he had never held, a face he had never seen, a name he had not known to say. It was the loss of something he had never possessed, and therefore could not even properly grieve, and it was the worst thing he had felt in his life, and he sat with it in the chair, and he let himself feel it, because the alternative was to turn it into something else, and he would not do that. Not tonight. Not with the boy sleeping 10 feet away. When he opened his eyes, Clara was watching him. She had gone very pale. "I need you to hear something," he said. She waited. "What you believed, it was wrong. But I understand that you believed it." He looked at her steadily. "I am not going to pretend that doesn't ask something of me. It does. It's going to ask something of me for a long time." He paused. "But that boy is going to wake up in the morning in this cabin, and he is going to see me here, and I am going to be someone worth seeing. That is what I can tell you tonight. The rest of it," he exhaled once. Slowly, "the rest of it we're going to have to build. And I won't lie to you about how long it might take." Clara Marsh looked at him across the cabin with 6 years and one terrible mistake between them, and her eyes did not fill, and her voice when she spoke was steady in the way that things are steady when they have found the ground they were looking for. "That's all I came to ask," she said. He nodded. Then he said, "You're 6. How bad?" She told him honestly. He listened and did not change his expression in a way she could read. Then he got up and he put the kettle back on, and he found the dried yarrow, kept for his own fevers, and he made her a tea with it, and he brought it to her, and he sat back down. She drank it. "The storm will hold 3 days," he said. "Maybe 4. I know you'll stay until you can travel safely." "I know," she said again, and then quietly, "Thank you." He looked at the fire. "He said that was a good name," Rowan said, "for the dog." "He means it as a compliment," she said. "He's very serious about names." Something shifted in Rowan's face. Not a smile, but the approach of one, the first movement of a feature that had been still for a long time. He looked at the sleeping boy. He looked for a long time. Then he got up and added wood to the fire, and the cabin settled into the particular warmth of a room that is being kept against the cold on purpose, and outside the blizzard continued its business, and inside the three of them waited out the night. He was at the stove when Samuel woke. The boy sat up on the cot and looked at the cabin in the morning light. Gray light, blizzard light, the light of a world that has been covered over, and he looked at Rowan, and Rowan looked back and said, "Flapjacks." Samuel's eyes moved to his mother, who was asleep in the chair with a blanket over her, and then back to Rowan. "She's resting," Rowan said. "She's going to be all right. You want flapjacks?" Samuel climbed off the cot. He stood in the middle of the cabin for a moment in his socked feet. Rowan had found a spare pair, large, turned down at the top, and then he came and stood beside the stove and watched Rowan work with the close attention he apparently gave to things that interested him. "You need help," he said. "Probably," Rowan said. He handed Samuel the spoon. The boy stirred the batter with both hands on the handle, tongue pressed to his upper lip in concentration, and Rowan watched him from beside the stove. and felt the feeling he had felt in the dark of the night, the enormity of the absence, the weight of 5 years unlived, but differently now, with the boy right here, solid and present, and engaged with the flapjack batter with his whole self. It was not a comfort exactly, but it was something that could become one. He could feel the shape of what it might become if he gave it time and did not flinch from it. He took the pan. He made the flapjacks. He made them the way his mother had, small and thick, 6 of them, and he put them on the plate, and he gave Samuel the honey jar and watched a 5-year-old apply honey to flapjacks with the comprehensive generosity that only children and people who have been very hungry bring to the task. Clara woke to the smell of it. She sat up slowly, following the smell the way a person follows light, and she looked at the table. Samuel on the bench, honey sticky, flapjacks mostly gone, and she looked at Rowan by the stove, and the look on her face was not happiness, and was not relief, but was something older and quieter than either of those things. The look of a woman who has been carrying something alone for a very long time, and has finally, in the presence of someone else, been able to set it down. Rowan poured her coffee and set it on the table. He sat down across from his son and said nothing. Outside, the blizzard kept going, indifferent to all of them, going about the business of covering the mountain the way mountains are covered, without asking permission and without distinction. Inside, the stove burned, and the coffee was hot, and Samuel tipped the honey jar one more time, and Rowan Holt did not look away from the boy's face. He was not going to look away. Not today, not any day after this. The storm broke on the 4th morning. By afternoon, the pass road was passable, and Rowan sent word down to Hardin Creek Pass with the first rider through that he needed Doc Emery, and Doc Emery came the following day and confirmed what Rowan had already concluded. Clara's lungs were inflamed and required rest and warmth and time, and the cabin on the mountain was better than any other option. Until February she stayed. The first week she was too ill to do much besides rest and talk, when the talking didn't cost her, and Rowan found that after 6 years of silence the talking came back in the careful incremental way of a fire rebuilt from coals. Not all at once, not perfectly, but warm in the places it reached. She told him about Billings. He told her about the 3 years after she left that he did not like to remember. Neither of them spoke around the hard parts, and neither of them lingered in them. Samuel learned where Rowan kept the spare wood. He learned that Buck the dog had been buried under the big fir at the east edge of the property, and he visited this location twice with the gravity of someone paying respects. He learned that Rowan could identify 12 kinds of animal tracks in the snow, and he began to apply himself to this knowledge with the fervor of a child who has found an area of study that matches his precise interest. On the 14th day of the stay, he called Rowan by name for the first time. Not Papa, he had not been told to, and Rowan had not asked it. Just Rowan. In the direct way he said most things, asking whether the tracks by the east fence were the fox or the other one, the one that moved differently. Rowan went and looked and said, "Rabbit." Samuel nodded, with the satisfaction of a student whose hypothesis has been either confirmed or helpfully corrected. Rowan stood in the snow, looking at the tracks for a moment after the boy went back inside. He was not a man who cried. He had not cried at his father's death, or at Clara's leaving, or at any of the 17 versions of why she had left that he had constructed across 6 years of mountain winters. He did not cry now. He stood there for 36 seconds. He was not counting, but that was how long it was. And he looked at the small boot prints leading back to his cabin door, and he went inside. They were married in the spring when the roads cleared, and Clara's lungs were sound. And Samuel had learned all 12-track varieties and was working on a 13th. The ceremony was in the Hardin Creek Pass Church, which held 40 people and held all 40 that morning, because word of the blizzard night had moved through the valley the way such things move. Not gossip, but passed, with the particular weight of a story people recognize as mattering. Doc Emery stood as witness. Samuel stood beside his mother in the new coat Rowan had ordered from Billings, a proper one, with all its buttons, and delivered his single spoken part, which was to confirm to the minister that yes, he agreed, when asked if anyone present wished to object. He had misunderstood the question. No one corrected him. Several people in the pews were not entirely successful at keeping straight faces, and Rowan was one of them, which was the first time anyone in Hardin Creek Pass had seen Rowan Holt smile in 6 years, and it was noted. Rowan Holt had lost 6 years. He had known in the weeks since the blizzard that he would be a long time accounting for this loss. Not with bitterness, not with blame, but in the plain way of a man who understands that some debts are paid not by resolution but by duration. You live forward into them. You do not look for the moment they disappear, because they do not disappear. You simply carry them differently as time adds its weight to the other side of the scale. He had a son. The boy was 5 years old, and he knew 12 animal tracks, and he had strong opinions about names, and he applied honey to flapjacks the way you apply something precious to something that deserves it. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and he slept with the totality of a person who has decided where he is safe. The first time Samuel called him Papa, it was an accident, a Tuesday morning in March, asked offhand while pulling on his boots whether Papa had seen where he left his other mitten. The boy realized what he had said half a second after he said it, and looked up with the careful attention of someone checking to see if the ground still holds. Rowan found the mitten. He handed it over. He said, "Check the shelf by the door next time." Samuel put the mitten on. He went outside. That was all. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the beginning of what enough could grow into. Rowan Holt had not always been able to offer safety. He was going to spend the rest of his life being someone who could. He had decided this on the fourth morning of the blizzard, watching a boy stir flapjack batter with his tongue pressed to his upper lip and his whole self attending to the task, and he had not changed his mind once in all the days since. He did not intend to.